Thanks for having me. So my question is about international relations, as you say, the Ukraine and Russian crisis. So currently, the world is focusing on this crisis. And I'm just wondering, what are the geopolitical implications for the Asia-Pacific region, depending on the path that Russia takes?
Thank you for that. Greg, I'll bring you back in on this because, of course, we did also see during the Olympic Games the signing of what's being called this No Limits Pact, or a new form of alliance, if that's not too strong a word, between China and Russia. What are the implications? Ukraine may seem like a long way away. Australia has already lost people as a result of the conflict. Remember the downing of the Malaysian Airlines plane. But what are the reverberations for our region?
Well, Stan, and I really appreciate the question, the connection now between everything on the globe is very intense. So the Biden administration made a debacle of the way it withdrew from Afghanistan. That diminished its sense of competence, its aura of consequence in the world. No one is watching what happens in Ukraine more closely than China. So there are different ways that Ukraine can affect what happens in Taiwan. Of course, Ukraine is tremendously important in its own sake. 44 million people, they deserve not to be assaulted by Russia, not to have their sovereignty trampled on. But in terms of the outcome for the Asia-Pacific, if Putin just manages to keep a sense of crisis in Ukraine all the time, he will hope to divide NATO and draw America into sending a lot of resources to Europe, which are resources that he takes away from the Indo-Pacific. Already, it's an open question whether, in conventional terms, the United States could deal with a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. I don't think there's a simple one-to-one relationship that if the Russians invade Ukraine, the Chinese will think that's good timing and they'll invade Taiwan. But if the Americans react without consequence, or the Europeans are divided from the Americans, and we've got to, recognise incredible European weakness here. Western Europe is much bigger and much richer than Russia, but it can do nothing against Russia unless America does it for it. This will affect the way China views its prospects in Taiwan. And just as Putin has many, many options in Ukraine, from cyber, through limited territorial acquisition, through missile strikes, through disinformation campaigns, all the way up to invasion, so Beijing has many, many options in Taiwan, from cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, grey zone activities, maybe taking one outlying island first, perhaps blockading Taiwan as Russia might blockade Odessa. And if the West fails in Ukraine, that will not only be a tragedy in itself, but I think it increases the likelihood of Beijing doing something military and kinetic and violent and terrible in Taiwan.
Lavina, both Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping have expressed a view that they believe that the West is weakening, is waning. They point to things like the American withdrawal from Afghanistan and the return of the Taliban as evidence of this. It is a question, as Greg says, isn't it, of American resolve, and particularly for Australian security, that resolve is absolutely essential. How do you assess that at the moment, vis-a-vis China and Russia and the potential for some form of military action in Taiwan?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it is, as Greg said, it is a litmus test of the resolve of the United States and its allies and partners. Are they willing to expend blood and treasure defending values, defending small states against authoritarian nations that trample on sovereignty? Joe Biden has said very explicitly he's not going to put American troops in Ukraine. And there is a question about that. So they seem to be, ratcheting up their deterrent capabilities. So they are trying to make it as unpalatable as possible to effectively deter Russia from actually crossing that line. But it seems as though they're spending more efforts to make an invasion more difficult as opposed to stopping the invasion in the first place. So yes, there are, the military action is off the table. I think they haven't probably armed Ukraine sufficiently. I think they could do more. They are threatening quite legitimately, I think, that they are going to put quite serious financial, technological sanctions on Russia, which should make him think somewhat twice about whether it's worth it. Things like denying Russian entities, and not just small entities. So Russia has been under sanctions since it took Crimea. But now we're talking about including large Russian entities and stopping them from getting access to the American dollar. So that will have quite major implications for Russian entities and any other country that wants to do business with Russia, including Chinese entities, will also be subject to effectively secondary sanctions.
Allegra Spender, you're seeking to enter Parliament at a time when we are really at a bit of a hinge point. And Greg's talked about that, and Lavina's laid out what the risks are here and the risks for the region. For someone like Vladimir Putin, who's weighing up the cost of sanctions versus achieving his aims in bringing Ukraine back under his sphere of influence and stopping it entering NATO, what are the options for countries like Australia, middle power countries, in being able to influence, bring some influence to bear in situations like this?
Look, I think Australia needs to work with its allies, and I think that is absolutely appropriate, and it needs to work in conjunction with the different groups that Australia is part of, and look at the economic sanctions, which are certainly the things that we would expect to see Australia to participate in relation to Europe. And I think then Australia also needs to consider, I think, the point that was raised about what this means in terms of China's relationship in our area, because that is going to be something that is of greatest importance to that.
Can I just ask you, though, there is a cost to be paid here, and Australia has paid a cost already from standing up to China, a real cost to our economy. We know that there have been trade bans placed on various products. There's a deep freeze. Australia doesn't speak to China, or China doesn't speak to Australia. So how do we navigate that, knowing that there is going to be a cost, sometimes a cost even greater for countries like us than, say, the United States may pay?
Look, I think that, I guess two things on this. One is that, we have paid, I think, a high price, for what we've done with China, and I think what we've done with China is completely appropriate. That said, I think we have missed the opportunity to continue to have ministerial relationships and to have some back channels open with China, which I think could be helpful in terms of maintaining.
But if they won't speak to us, what?
No, well, I think, but that is about the quality of the relationship that we foster as well. And so I think those are real questions, and I think we need to make sure that we are using our diplomacy appropriately in that situation. And then I think, I know there are always costs, but I think we should also look at what are the opportunities and also what are the lessons from this. And I look at Russia, what is going on in Russia, and I say, look, one of the reasons why Europe finds it difficult to deal with Russia is because of the dependence on gas and energy. And I think that actually brings us back to what Australia's opportunity is in its world, in being a really opportunity in terms of a clean energy superpower, and actually playing a really positive role in terms of being an export that the rest of the world can depend on. And it also reflects in terms of what we should be thinking about our own energy security and our own reliance on foreign oil.